Hi there, it's Eric, and this is my assignment 2 project here. I've done mine on video games, just to show it working here. So essentially what I've got, a couple radio dials here to determine what type of game that you're playing. When you do select either a single player or multiplayer or the MMO, essentially the max number of players does gray out. I have that hard coded so that if you are playing a single player, it automatically sets the value to 1. If it's an MMO, I've got it up to like 999 million, something like that. So the only time you can actually set anything is you actually do multiplayer, and that itself I have capped at about 20 players. Just there's not too many actual games out there that are more than that. I mean, like, certain games I know, like Fortnite nowadays, does have like a 100-player like battle limit, but you could probably constitute that as an MMO to some degree. Just to show that it works, we'll do World of Warcraft just to kind of get started here. Warcraft, and this is developed by Blizzard. Okay, it's an RPG and it is rated teen, and if I'm not mistaken, this is like November 2004, if I do remember. I was going to say the 23rd. But it is an MMO, and it is for the PC. It's the only console it's been for, so I'll add that game. All information provided, video game created, and added to the file. And as you can see down here, World of Warcraft developed by Blizzard has been created, file has been updated, which is great. So the file itself is over here, it's under the whole project build, and it does say World of Warcraft developed by Blizzard. So I'm just going to add one more here, and I'll make sure that that gets added here. Let's see, let's try just Diablo at this point here, Diablo 3. Still technically an MMO of sorts. Let's just change up the date a bit and go up a couple years. Also PC, but it's also been released on PlayStation at some point. It's actually the PS3 if I'm not mistaken. So this one's more action adventure, or even just action really. And that should be fine. Okay, now let's check our file, and it should have added. Yeah, so Diablo 3 developed by Blizzard has been added to our file. Okay, so that is that working. So what I'm going to do is show it when it doesn't want to do something proper. So right now it does check and make sure that everything is filled out. If it's not, it does throw up a warning saying some information is missing. Please ensure all fields are filled out. So I've double checked on everything. It does make sure everything is filled out. If one thing's missing, it will yell at you, including radio dials. It'll still give you the warning. Same with the checkboxes. Now, the other one I do have, as far as the release date, I do have a check in there to make sure that the game is not like so far in the future. So it's basically if the date period is greater or equal to 0 months, it'll put it in. But anything less than 0 months, obviously it's not going to do. So if I went to say June, coming up here, it is going to give a warning saying release date can't be set in the future. So that is working as intended. But yeah, that's everything as far as the actual program working. It is doing what I need it to do, so that's great. As for the code itself, I will show you the test here, and I'll just run this real quick. So all my tests have passed. I do have this currently set up for just a World of Warcraft kind of game again, and all the tests are double checking everything that's in there. It should cover all of them. Let's see what else. As far as the actual code, I'll go through the manager and then the actual video game portion. So as for my manager, the first portion is just getting all the FXML pieces kind of put it. Now as for the initialization, what I've actually done, so within the program itself, let's load it up real quick here. So these two boxes here, this genre and the ESRB ratings, the way this data is actually populated is actually through my video games. Because I made these static, this list here and this list here is what it's actually pulling from. So if I make an update to this, then it'll update everything for me. So that's what this section's doing here. It's just pulling that data and then setting the items to be everything from that collection, essentially. And then I've got the spinner being set up for the max number of players, like I said, starting at 2, going up to 20. Now, as far as the actual adding the video game portion, the very first thing I'm basically wanting to do, there's 2 things I want to check. So the first thing I'm taking a look at is our consoles. So make sure I add all the consoles that's been selected into an array list, and after that I'm just making sure that if one of the radial dials have been selected, then I change our game type to be of that value. At that point there, I'll do basically an overall check to make sure all the information's actually been provided. So it's looking at everything, if anything's like null or equal to blank for like the text field and stuff like that. And if any of that is blank, that's when it gives out that warning saying that some information is missing, and then just returns so that we get out of it. If, however, that all gets cleared up, I basically have a bunch of variables that will tie the values from the fields that have been input, so that we can actually use those to send off into our video game. So what I have done is I've set up the actual game itself outside of this try catch block, and the reason for that is I do end up using this new game value a little later. But within the try catch block, the reason I'm doing it is if for any reason there's an error, in particular, like say the release date, for instance, it'll at least catch that, and then as far as the actual exception, it'll actually throw the localized message that I set up in our video game section. So that's how that's all done. If it manages to get through that, that's when we say, you know, everything's been good, it's been created, and then we do the write to the file. These 2 quick things here, this is what's making the spinner disabled or enabled depending on if we're hitting select multiplayer or the MMO. That's what those 2 are for. And then here's our write to file. So essentially I got it in a try catch block because essentially what I'm doing, the try file, or not the try file, the file name, I want to make sure that it exists to actually write it. So essentially I'm running through the path and making sure it exists, and if it doesn't, then I create it. And then from there we'll set up a file writer, and basically in order to have the new line and stuff like that, I basically just created a new string here, and then I've given my game the toString method that I've set up, which if I can find it in here, where is it? It's in here somewhere. Valid. No, it's in here, but it's printing to the page. Oh, here it is. So yeah, so the title, developed by, and then the developer itself. So taking that and then just adding that new line to this thing, because otherwise it got a little harder trying to actually input that into the write function. And I'm just passing that info into the write, and then letting us know that it's been updated, and then closing it off. And then if for any reason we couldn't do it, then I just have an error here saying, you know, there's an error adding the game to the file. So that's the basics of the video game manager in itself. And yeah, everything else is pretty self-explanatory. This is mostly just getters and setters. The only other thing I have here at the end for a couple of just, you know, Boolean checks, you know, to confirm if the game is PC or not. I'm not currently using any of that at the moment in the current version, but they are tools that could be used if I further develop this. So that is all.